All right, guys, we're back, and today we have Garrett Wood with us, which is really exciting. He has lots of areas of expertise, so we'll see exactly which ones we get to explore today. Garrett, do you want to start with telling us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited. I own and operate Gnosis Therapy. It's a health and wellness clinic for executives who are trying to do all the things and not actually end in burnout. So we're really focused on trying to make sure that they get their health and well-being as high as they can so they can sustain high performance without all the cost of their health, wealth, and relationships in the long run.
I'm very curious how you guys help facilitate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really lucky with the clientele that I work with, where they're very motivated. They've achieved a lot, and they're really willing to work hard. So it makes it really easy to kind of leverage that into just trying to shift the focus from those external achievements into more of the things in their life that'll help support them through that process.
Okay.
What made you want to start this venture even to begin with?
Yeah, so originally health and wellness was really helpful for me personally, getting running, getting moving. But I overdid it. I have a tendency to kind of overdo things in my personal life. So it's really nice having people outside of yourself to help slow you down or speed you up when you need that encouragement or when you need someone to be like, hey, you've done enough for today. Time out. Take a break. Um, and so when I was in that industry, I'd originally been doing some internships. With finance people. And when I grew up, everybody who had money seemed to have no problems, or at least not the problems that we had at my house growing up. So I was like, oh, the finance people, that's the secret to happiness. I'm going to go do that. And when I was internship interning with them, I noticed that, yeah, they might have the nice car. They might not have to worry about their mortgage payments, but they definitely had a lot of other issues that were showing up interpersonally at their home. I think a lot of it was what I was seeing was their coping mechanisms that they were trying to combat the burnout with, just so they could keep going throughout the day. But I was a kid. I didn't know what I was seeing, right? Um, but I did know that it wasn't the answer that I thought it was after getting an up close, kind of over the shoulder look. Um, and so when I started doing my own health and wellness journey, I was like, this is great. I love this. I loved the person I was hanging out with. He seemed to love his clientele. So I ended up going back to school to be a part of that every day, all day. And so we ended up turning that into helping people in those high executive positions with their sleep, with their nutrition, with their movement, their strength training. And I'd been doing that for so long that I ended up being pretty successful at it. And I ended up having a team of like over 100 people over 7 locations, which was great. But it was a very high production company, very driven by numbers, which was awesome because you could be like, I'm going to try this new initiative. And then like 3 hours later, you could see the report if it's actually working or not immediately. And we were managed to that. So it was kind of like a very performance driven kind of
Mm.
outcome based, very competitive company. And I struggled a lot with it. I thought I was doing well. I loved the work. I was very passionate about it. They say if you're passionate about something, you'll never work in your day in life. I disagree. I think every day you will work if you're passionate about it. You'll never get that time off. So it was pretty fun for a long time until my hip pain, my back pain, my relationships. My dog was a cute dog, but it was always being a cute dog. And there's days where it wasn't so cute to me. There was days where it was like stressful and overwhelming and frustrating. And, they would get a little bit of my irritation going. So, um, in that process, when I was looking around, I'd always see this gentleman who'd been with the organization for 20 of their 25 years, and he was always the high achiever on the list. So whenever we're having our down moments, me and my other colleagues, we'd be like, all right, well, he can do it. We can do it. We got to figure this out. It must be a me thing. So we dig deeper and kind of put our stuff on the back burner and keep going. But we were in a meeting with his replacement because he got let go pretty suddenly. And 2 weeks later, we're sitting in a meeting with his replacement. And in that meeting, we got word that he had given so much of his own self, his own life, his own identity for so long that, like, without that title, there wasn't much left for himself in his own life.
Mm.
So that there wasn't enough for him to live for, he decided. And that was a pretty big wake up call for me. Because here we are trying to help everybody, health
Oh,
and
wow.
wellness, sacrificing our own in the pursuit of our passion and our goals and our values and the outcomes we see. And for that to end up something like that, it was just like, it recategorized everything I'd seen my whole life. Like, oh, that's what that is. That's what's going on here.
Yeah.
So,
You said something early. It wasn't the answer I thought it was.
Yeah.
And I think within that alone, like, because even as you tell us about this overachiever who kind of lost his connection to purpose, let's say, um, we think the answer is one thing, but it's largely because we don't understand the problem a lot of times, right? So, like from the childhood perspective, you're seeing all these people with money. Oh, they don't have the problem. Then you get close and you're like, oh no, they just have different problems. And we see this, in the health and wellness world all the time when people are trying to preach health and wellness from a holistic standpoint. And then if you go behind the scenes, a lot of times they're stuck in some of the same stuff. Some are, some aren't, but it's that constant battle. And I actually just came back from this World Business Conference last week, and they were talking about how we incentivize people. So when you're mentioning kind of the high performance within the company, it's like the whole model needs to shift to actually be what you want it to be, not just in the company, but outside. And I think obviously, you've moved and things have grown, but like I think that is a much bigger theme of like how individuals pursue things and why they pursue them. It's an answer to a problem they don't fully understand. And then rather than understanding the whole kind of holistic model of it, they just go with, well, here's a solution. This seems better, right? Let's help people this way. And it's impactful. But if what's incentivized is the same stuff that creates a hustle, bustle, and burnout, it doesn't matter if it's for good. Everyone will still experience the hustle, bustle, of burnout because that's what's being reinforced and incentivized, right?
Yeah. It almost sets up a situation where the more successful you are, the more it costs you if we don't have like guardrails in place to protect people against their own burnout. Yeah.
So how
So
do you teach people the guardrails? Sorry, I'll
it's okay.
stop.
There's a few different guardrails. Some of that's like how much sleep are you getting? How much water have you drank, right? Those are like standard bio budgets that we all have that we all know about at this point, but like maybe try to like shame and blame ourselves into getting more of them. But when you have to perform and it feels like you don't have another choice, it's fine for like a sprint. Like we're adaptive, we're really resilient creatures. Obviously, we can get through like a long weekend. But when that becomes like the only strategy we have or the one we have to use every time to get through, that's where it starts becoming chronic. And so we really have to make sure we're aware of that. But typically, the reason why we get into that position in the first place is because we have all this like productivity hacks or this idea of like time management that's like off the shelf stuff. And I know that like sometimes you get lucky, you go to a clothing store and you're like, that looks right. It's my size. You put it on and it's like it was made for you. Like it just fits perfectly. But I think I've had that experience like, I have a closet full of stuff and I probably like two or three things in there because it's that experience.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing with most of our productivity stuff that we see out there. You wake up and they're like, oh, eat the frog or do the hard thing first or just do the one thing. And then other people are like, do a bunch of the little things that are exciting for you that get you through. And all of it's good advice. I'm not saying it's not good advice and it can be helpful for some people. But if you're taking someone's helpful advice that fits for them and putting it on you and it doesn't actually align with how your executive functioning strengths are up, in fact, the strategy relies on an executive functioning strength that's like one of your bottom of the barrel versions of it. And then that's kind of invoked into the culture that you're expected to operate in. You can still get the work done, but the amount of like willpower and discipline and like shame and guilt that you're going to have to use to motivate yourself just to take two or three steps, that is not a successful strategy. Like that drill instructor, come on, you can do it, dig deep. Sure, two or three steps, the last 2 miles of a marathon, maybe, right? But work isn't a marathon. It's not done in 4 hours or six. It's 8 hours to 12 hours every day for the next however many years of your life. We have to have a better strategy than that drill instructor. And if that's the only one we have, and we have to use it because we're using these strange executive functioning strengths that don't match our own, that's where we see a lot of people get in trouble.
So I'm curious, what's different between the wellness place that you worked at before and the one that you've created?
Yeah, big difference is we're not so much focused on can you do a full squat with like your body weight. It seems like your strength and performance is more an outcome that naturally results from like having a really natural, healthy environment around you. So, for example, the sensory environment that you find yourself in every day really makes a big difference. If you're in an environment where it's really loud and you need a very quiet environment, it's gonna be really challenging for you to get through your day. By the end of the day, when you get home and you've decided to shut off your computer and you're being really good about your boundaries and you're not going to open it up and you're not going to check on your phone, you still don't have a lot of energy left for anything else. Whether that's like a hobby that's like restorative for you that you actually think is interesting and fun, or showing up as a good partner or parent, or doing the self-care activities, whatever that may be. Maybe it is going to the gym or a yoga class or something like that. You won't have the energy left over to do it because you've spent so much energy just getting through your day. They've done that marshmallow study with the little 4-year-olds where they give them a marshmallow and they say, "Hey, I'm going to leave. If I come back and the marshmallow's still there, I'll give you another one." Right? And everyone's like, "Oh, it's so cute. Such a cute study." And they follow up with the kids, and the kids that were able to do that task were really successful academically. They have very successful careers. They achieved more than the people who didn't. And then Stuart Schachter kind of went back and looked at some of the kids that didn't say no to that first marshmallow. And he followed up with them and he found out that they have different sensory needs than most people. Not that they have a sensory processing disorder, but that their environment that they were tested in was not a match for what their nervous system needed. The hard part for those kids is that the environment they were tested in was a classroom environment. So was the
Eh.
environment that they showed up in every day, all day. So now we're testing kids on their academic ability. An environment like for me would be like sirens and trash trucks in my like office with me. It wouldn't matter. It would be very hard for me to be able to be attuned and paying attention and listening and asking good questions if that was happening. And so that's kind of what those kids were experiencing. And it's a lot of us are experiencing, but we're so used to it for so long that we're not even aware. And at the end of the day, we've got our work done. We've done as best we can, mitigating all of those things in our periphery, and it takes a toll. And so those are the types of things we're focusing on. What are the things that make it impossible or challenging or add more friction in your life that get in the way of you doing the things that you know you could or would like to do if you had more time or more energy? There's a reason why we don't have those things. It's trying to figure out what they are that get in the way.
That's pretty cool. So, what role does clinical hypnosis play in what you're doing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to use hypnotherapy for people to help them. The way that I typically use it in my practice is three different ways. One, when people need to perform and they need to be able to tune all of the excess noise out when the stakes feel really high, but they can't pay attention to that in that moment and still need to focus, we can use hypnotherapy to help make that easier for them. So like giving up and giving a public speech. A lot of people that's like, there's 5 people in the room, I can do that. There's 10 people, oh, something happened, I can't do it. There's 50 people, there's 500, 5,000. Ooh, like it's not that they don't know the stuff, it's not that their expertise has changed. It's not that the words have changed or the syllables, but something inside of them has changed. And it's that stakes feeling like they're high that make it so much more challenging just to focus their attention on the task at hand that they know they can do. And so being able to be skilled to tune that stuff out is one of the powerful benefits of hypnotherapy. The second one is if we're always go, 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 and we have no time to like slow down and rest and restore, that is chronic stress and we're going to burn out just from that. And so being able to induce a state of like deep focused relaxation when you need to is a really powerful tool to help people restore their ability to get into that relaxed state. And all hypnosis is self hypnosis. So teaching people how to get into that state and maintain it on their own is a really powerful tool. Maybe they have 3 minutes in their car between transitions. Maybe they need to do it before they're going to bed or in the morning when they're waking up. There's different times throughout the day where we can sneak in kind of those little fluctuating states and really amplify them. So we get a nice big break as much as we can for the nervous system. And then they don't get stuck in their mind wandering where it goes to like the unfinished tasks and rumination, which doesn't give people now they have the time to relax, but their mind isn't giving them the chance to do it. Oh, and so that's really helpful for that. And then on a deeper level, there's some of these beliefs we grew up with when we were kids, ideas about how we relate to ourselves, the world, and others, and like what we need to do to be able to perform well, or even what performance means. Like, I can't be safe unless other people are safe. If someone on my team is not having a good day, then I'm not allowed to have a good day. these types of tendencies that we grow up with that worked when we were kids and we didn't have a lot of autonomy, but that we carry through with us as adults and still show up in our day-to-day practices with our leaders and being a leader. It's really challenging to kind of see those patterns because we've lived with them for so long. So being able to pull them to the surface and then looking at, do they still serve us? Yes or no? And then challenging some of those and practicing different patterns in hypnotherapy is a really powerful tool to kind of change those limiting or those subconscious beliefs that we have.
Hmm. Um, I noticed, Alicia, you're pausing because I'm sure you know I want to ask a million questions.
See you
So,
brewing over there.
um, well, I love health and wellness, all things. I started my career as a personal trainer, went through the nutrition specialist certification. So, like integrating all the things you're talking about, um, definitely has been tried and true in like my entire journey. And then it was coincidental that this happened at the same time as COVID that I kind of got into coaching more from a behavioral standpoint and love hypnosis. And I guess that's kind of the thing I'm curious about from your perspective, because you talk about sensory system and their nervous system and how just like withholding some of the irritants of our day is an extra tax that people don't really consider, right? It's just the way life is, it's normalized, and we don't take that into consideration. There's the limiting beliefs and how that perpetuates. So I guess all that to say, like I specialize as a mindset coach. So when you're teaching these executives, how to find balance. Do you do mindset work beyond hypnotherapy?
Yeah, so mindset work I think is really powerful. There's a book out there called Sleight of Hand, which I think is really interesting. It's based upon a lot of the NLP stuff, which is like the way we internally talk about concepts, ideas, and values and how we represent them to ourselves and others.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting in there because you can hear what people say and the way they arrange their conversations with you, especially in like coaching conversations where we're talking about appreciative inquiry or motivational interviewing, behavior change, and they're giving you the list of the reasons why and why not something is a pro or a con, or it is a solution, but it also has these costs. And so there's a lot of really valuable insights in there that I share with clients like, hey, these are this model. If we were to ask this type of a question about your answer, do you think it would make change? And bringing them into that conversation and kind of showing them the behind the scenes of how we represent things to ourselves is an interesting part of what I think cognitive behavioral therapy is focused on. The hard part is that's like very cerebral. We are like way in the head. We are like questioning our questions about questions. Like that's like,
Metacognition.
whew,
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. I love it. It helps with adaptive flexibility. It helps you approach problems in new ways, and it opens up a lot of doors and like gets people to creating and generating new ideas about how to do things. If they're in a burned out state, if their nervous system is overwhelmed, or if they don't feel like they're in good rapport with you as you're going through that with them, it's not going to land. There,
Oh, for sure.
it's going to maybe make it more stressful for them because now they're thinking about all these things. They're like, I can't even handle brushing my teeth today. I can't do this. And so that's where we have that kind of nervous system approach first. And so we use a lot of regulation tools. And regulation is like a very fleeting experience for a lot of people, depending on the environment they find themselves in, who they're with, and the thoughts that they're having, how much food they've had in their system that day. As you know, with nutrition, like blood sugar can go all over the place. And so making sure that they have tools to be able to intervene on their behalf in that moment when they start noticing that. And then even if they can't regulate themselves, okay, great. Then that cerebral work, that like, meta model questioning, that cognitive flexibility stuff, we're going to put that on the back burner. We're not going to do that right now. That not the right moment, right? So
Right. They have to be open, or their system has to be open to receiving it.
yeah,
And like, depending where people are, I think I'm curious if you run into this, but I've run into it where people are like, I don't really want to regulate. Like, I just want to get to the solution. I'm like, that's great, but like, you're not going to get there because like your body's overtaxed as it is. Do you find that people take some warming up to the reality that they need to respect where their nervous system is?
I yeah, I think people hate it. That they're like, I think we all want to be like, no, I'm invincible. Like, come at me, bro.
Yeah.
I got this. And I think a lot of people I have a tendency to work with have had that historically work for them for a very long time. But that first piece of pizza is so tasty. But that 10th piece of pizza, we definitely gone
Yeah.
off the edge of like diminishing returns on that stuff. And so they're kind of aware that what they're doing doesn't work anymore. They just wish it would because it's what they know and it's what they're good at. And it's easy and effortless for them, even though it costs them something. So, like, slowing down and making that change is really challenging mentally, emotionally, physically, on the neurosynapses, like synaptic like pattern as well. Like, you're literally creating new patterns in your brain to run a whole new software program. And
Hmm.
so that's where I feel like the hypnotherapy is actually helpful as well, because we can do that in a subconscious state where they're already relaxed. We're getting the benefit of that relaxation response, and then we can practice some of those tasks and those skills and those ideas in a state where we're not like meeting that resistance
Hmm.
because it's so relaxed at the same time.
That, I mean, it makes perfect sense. I have like two follow-ups, I think.
Yeah,
One of the things you mentioned, like, okay, let's say for this question, the
yeah,
client is not in burnout. They're out of burnout, they're normal stress up and down, not like,
stuck. Yeah,
yes. Um, Information is one thing, but when it comes to the nervous system, getting your body on board with it is this whole separate gap that people have to travel. How do you help them understand how their nervous system is going to respond to it, but also how they can travel it?
yeah. So a lot of times it's working below that like neural edge. So there's always those like graphs out there of the like or like graphics of the comfort zone and the growth zone. And then
Hmm.
there's like, oh, we got to get out of our comfort zone to get into the growth zone to make the changes. And I like wholeheartedly believe in that, but I think a lot of the times we get stuck in this piece where it doesn't feel safe enough to move forward outside of the comfort zone. And a lot of the times, like with nutrition, people are like, oh, you're going to take away my favorite meal? Oof. And now I have to add in this thing I have no taste buds for and no like craveability for it. Oh, it doesn't matter how good it is for me and how much outcome that is. That's like 30 years from now. I'm going to live healthier and better and like see my great great grandchildren have smiles on their face. Yay. But that doesn't mean that the food tastes better necessarily, right? And when you have that gap, that's really challenging for people because anytime you start taking something away, it feels like a threat to them. So
Hmm.
instead, a lot of nutritionists talk about like, well, let's add stuff. Like, don't take that thing out. Let's just add all this extra stuff and we're good. I think it's the same thing with every behavioral modification that we're looking for. We want to make sure that if we're in the comfort zone and it doesn't feel safe to move into that growth zone, then we just add more safety. If we can grow the safety zone around the comfort zone and we can grow it even more around the growth zone, now it makes it a lot easier to build those tasks and those behaviors. Like if I was on a platform, I've been walking since I was, I don't know, a year and a half. I don't know when I started walking. I can do it. I can do it now pretty well. I can even have historically had a few drinks and been able to still stay upright. I could chew gum and talk on the phone. I could do it. No problem, right? But if you start lifting that up higher and higher off the ground, I'm going to start looking down a lot more. I'm going to start questioning if it's safe enough for me to do this. For everybody, they have a different appetite for risk of what feels safe for them. Some people it's 50 feet, some people it's 150 feet. Um, some people are hiking Angel's Crest like hike where it's just like there's nothing down there. They're just holding on. And some people are watching the video and their hands are getting sweaty of that. And the phone's about to drop out of their hand because they're so overwhelmed by it. Everyone has a different risk for that appetite there, appetite for that risk. But we can add safety for each one of those people. We can add a strap and a harness. We can add a safety net underneath it. We can add these things around it to accommodate their risk and the task enough to be able to make it easier for them to move. And then they can take action and they can build that skill, or they can remind themselves of their prowess that they already have of putting one step in front of the other and how easy and effortless it actually is to do that, regardless of how far the fall is.
Hmm.
So, what are some of your favorite ways to do this stuff? So, you start with the nervous system regulation and you're building in safeties. And you said everybody has a different nervous system reset. What are
Yeah.
some of the favorites that you are teaching people?
Yeah. So for a lot of there's a lot of things that could, every single person, if you've met one person with one type of thing, you've met one person with type of thing. So to try to make it as simple and easy and like to navigate for myself, seriously, and then also for them as well, is we kind of start off with these assessments and then we look at, okay, if this is what your nervous system actually needs, your unique version, not something that sounds good off the shelf, but like for
Mhm.
you actually. Okay, great. How can we accommodate that? What's the simplest, easiest thing we can do tomorrow? like in this moment to accommodate it. Okay, now that we're there, we can do some of that larger, longer term work where it's like, well, what's an easy way to start aligning your work with what you actually need? Where do we have some agency to be able to do that? And so it's that kind of assess, accommodate, align is kind of how we kind of navigate that. And then the assessments, we look at kind of 7 big drivers of what I have seen be really helpful for people's nervous systems, or the things that like we're not paying attention to that get in our way. One of those is that sensory intelligence work that we talked about, which was started by Anne Marie Lombard. She's a doctor of occupational therapy out of South Africa, and she was working with call center people. She's like, some of these people are gone in like 2 weeks. Some are gone, burned out in 90 days. Some people have been here for 6 years. What is the difference between these people? None of them met the criteria for occupational therapy needing sensory like diagnosis, like sensory processing issues, but they all had a different type of perception. And so she was like, oh, okay, these people aren't able to be here. We can save this company money. We can save this person a lot of headaches if we don't put them in a position that's not designed for what their nervous system needs. And so they can find other places for those people. That type of thing, if we're waiting for our employer to do that, they're not. They're going to take the 90 days. They're going to take the 6 months. They're not thinking about those things. And to be fair, sometimes like office plans aren't designed with sensory things and need in mind. They're designed for other reasons and other needs. We have those like nice conference rooms with fish bowls where it's like windows on one side and like glass on the other. And in that environment, it's great for HR because everybody can see what's going in. So there's no like claims or anything that can be out there. It keeps everybody safe. It makes sure that if you're alone with someone getting feedback, that like you don't feel 100% alone, which is a super important thing. But I had 2 people that I worked with, and they had a terrible relationship, really challenging interpersonal relationship. They had a lot of disgust and contempt for each other because they gave these feedback sessions in that room. And that was most of their interaction. And then by the time they would repair that relationship, it was time for another feedback session in this room. So we tried a lot of different interventions, but what seemed to work for them was to get that feedback session out of that room and just go outside and walk around the building. Now those 2 people actually have a pretty decent relationship. Their kids do play dates together. They call each other on the phone. They text message. When they're rolling their eyes, they're rolling their eyes at something else, not at each other. So I would say they're probably friends. They're friendly for sure. And the biggest change for them was matching the environment that they needed to be okay in with what their nervous system actually needed. I I like something that simple and that easy to make all of this interpersonal strife-filled, convoluted, combative relationship just gone like that. These are the things that we don't think about because it's so hardwired to our nervous system. Um, so yeah, assess, find out what your nervous system actually needs, accommodate it, doing something really simple, walking around the block instead of doing it in the fishbowl room, and then aligning your work along with that moving forward. If I'm getting critical feedback, I need to be in a calm nervous system to be able to be receptive to it and not hate the other person. What does my nervous system need to be able to do that? That kind of work.
So my understanding is, and just for confirmation,
Hmm.
you bring these executives in, you kind of get them assessed, tell them where they are, learn a little bit about, what their nervous system can handle, and then kind of
Yeah.
create this roadmap of those main pillars, sleep,
Yeah.
food, movement, right?
Yeah.
On how they can find a better balance where they're not burning themselves out, right?
Yeah.
Um, this is kind of a two-parter because we are evolutionary creatures. So like
Yeah.
maybe they're in January and by March their body's actually responding differently. Or
Yeah.
even from, a feminine component, like if you have a
Sure.
cycle, regulation is different week by week.
Yeah.
So how do you teach them to recognize the evolution of their nervous system? And I mean, for women, how do you kind of communicate how to recognize the differences in their body and how that can play into what they need?
Yeah. I think the idea that it's not trying to stay regulated forever, right? Like in this, like, we're not trying to be that like old dude on the mountain, the zenned out guy with like the long beard, right? I don't think that guy could survive 1 week in the corporate world or being a caregiver at work and at home. Um, but we look to that person, we're like, oh my gosh, they spend all their time in this zenned out state. That's what we want to do. We need to be able to have like a nice, big,
Mhm.
fluctuating pattern. The question isn't can we get stuck really high or really low? It's how quickly can we recover? Like when we do a treadmill like test, how high can you get your heart rate? How quickly does it come back down again? And so if you're in a different state of your week where you're going to have a different hormone profile and you're going to have different sensitivities that show up, you're going to have more patience or less depending on how you're feeling that day. It's acknowledging that and knowing it. That's that piece where we're accommodating it. If you know, if you're lucky enough to have a consistent cycle and you're like, cool, it's the second week of the month, that typically means for me, I need to watch out for these two things because that might be there. But it's not even just watching out for it. It's this piece of, oh, I need to be like a little bit kinder to myself. I need to be able to like have fluctuating expectations of myself this week. If I'm judging myself by week two feelings versus what I'm able to do on week one, that is not nice. That's not friendly. It's not appropriate. And if I was like an athletic trainer or I was your strength conditioning coach and we were on a soccer team and we were going to, I'd be like, hey, guess what? You're getting 5 minutes in the game instead of 15. Why? Because we don't want you to tear your ACL this week. Like these are very real things that are demonstratable, but we don't think about that when we come from an athletic setting into like a well-being setting. But cognitive athletes are the same thing as every other type of performance. It takes a toll on our body and we have to respect our physiology and work within it and make sure that we're like not holding ourselves to unfair standards.
In your assessment process,
Yeah.
uh, I know you do some work with attachment. Is that something that you're also analyzing in the beginning?
Yeah. So if interpersonal relationships seem to be the largest challenge for that person, we would be looking at their attachment history for sure. Some of that we'd be doing through like leadership, like, hey, in your career, talk to me about the different leaders you've had, you know? It's kind of like a modified attachment interview where we talk about like relationship inventories. If we were talking about romantic relationships, we're like, oh, how did it start? Who ended it? What did you feel like during that relationship? But with leadership, it's more who did you enjoy working for or with? What was special about that relationship that was different from other ones that you had? When stress happened and you were able to get out of that state through your relationship with your leader, what did that look like? Because sometimes you'll have a leader and their style doesn't matter if it's servant or transformational or whatever it may be. If their attachment style is not a match for the person on their team's attachment style, there's something deeper going on. And so one leader will be like, yeah, that leader's a sink or swim leader. Like, I just feel like they just leave me out on my own to dry and I'm just sinking all the day and I never get the support I need. And that same leader by a different person on their team will be accused of being a micromanager. Like, he's always over my shoulder. What a jerk. He never trusts me to do anything myself. And it's not so much their behaviors or the actions they're taking, it's how it's being perceived or received by that person. That when they're stressed, how do they seek comfort in that relationship with their leader? Do they move closer to them or do they move further away? If they're the person that needs to move further away and that leader's there to try to help them in kind of that neutral state, that's going to be perceived as micromanaging. If they're a person that really needs to move in close to feel comfortable, to feel calm so they can calm back down and get focused on the work, and that leader still stays in that neutral space, they're gonna be like, what a jerk. Just totally out there, ignoring my needs. What? I can't get any help around here. If I could just get some help, my job would be easy. Because work is stressful and things happen all the time, and people want to do a good job. And so when things don't go how is expected, they get distressed. And to be able to recover, we turn to our leaders. We like actually look to them to help support us through that process. Now, what type of support that person needs depends on like their competency at that actual task, their motivation, but then also depends on their leader, their attachment style as well.
I love that. So there's all kinds of things that you guys are evaluating for.
There's about seven of those drivers that we're looking at. So one of those is the sensory intelligence we talked about. Another one's the bio budgets, right? Sleep, nutrition, and it's like big building blocks. We're not getting into the nitty gritty of that stuff. Those things I refer out, right? If someone has sleep apnea, we're talking about that. If someone has nutritional goals, we're going to pull in someone who can actually help them with that. That's like an actual trained professional in nutrition. um, can't get out there being like, I don't know, right? And then the next part is we look at their emotional regulation. If they have no ability to access positive emotions, it's going to be really challenging to stay out of burnout and get your work done. And so we'll look at kind of some emotional regulation work as well. We look at those attachments, we look at those subconscious beliefs, and then we look at their kind of values and their strengths when they show up and they're really living their life the best that they know how to. not at work necessarily, anywhere in life. Like when they're just content with being themselves, when they were 5, when they were 15, when they were 25, what do all of those have in common for them? Okay, when was the last time we had access to kind of that consistently on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis? If it's been a while, then we're in trouble. So we got to start thinking about how they show up, how they can do that. Once again, can't do any of that work if they're dysregulated. So we got to get regulated first, then get into that relation, and then we can do all of that stuff. But yeah,
Do you think people know themselves?
I think they know when things aren't working. I think they know that. Yeah.
So, so no, right? If we only recognize when things aren't working, then do we actually know ourselves, or do we only experience ourselves when we are getting negative, if we want to call it that, feedback of we don't like what we're getting back?
Yeah. We don't like what we're getting back. We have a judgment about that. Yeah. We're like, oh, there's a gap here. There's an opportunity for growth for sure. Yeah.
Um, and I mean, coincidentally, my girl Alicia posted something perfect today on socials, so now it's ringing in my head that like what was the best advice that she's gotten, and she said it wasn't really about advice per se, but it was a mindset about how important the relationship you have with yourself is, right?
Yeah.
So how do you guys, because like when we think about, or when I think about nervous system, like
Yeah.
it's kind of this like humble respect you learn about capacity in a very uncomfortable way for most executives, because it's let me push, 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 push. I've always worked this way. It's always, and then you just kind of run into the wall and you're like, what the hell? Why is it not working? But getting the nervous system back, giving it the time to recover, just like anything with a broken bone, for instance, that's where
Yeah.
the resistance is, because the mind is like, okay, I'm ready again before the body is ready again. So that relationship with yourself, I feel like, is super integrated into our nervous system. So how do you guys emphasize that, communicate that? Do you emphasize that, I suppose?
Yeah, that strengths and values piece, there's like an identity component that shows up. Like with my colleague, his entire identity was his title. So when he lost his position, he lost himself. When I was in college, one of my roommates was on his third knee surgery, right? Freshman year of college. He was on a full ride scholarship. And so he was very concerned that this was it. This was the end of his career. And that concern of losing his identity as an athlete, as a soccer player, put him into a pretty gnarly tailspin that he wasn't able to pull up out of. He stopped going to classes. One of the smartest guys I know, um, he'd be in the room just reading these like thick, solid textbooks that he'd gotten from the library, but he wasn't showing up to class and taking tests. He just had nothing. Executive function completely dropped off, full depression. He never fully recovered from that. And even
Mm.
now, as a college dropout, that made it even more challenging for him to kind of go back and do that himself. So, this idea of like, okay, my mind is ready, but my body is not, and I want to keep pushing harder. I think if you only have one way to access self esteem or appreciation for yourself, then it feels like almost like a compulsion. Like you have to do it because we have this belief about ourselves that I'm like a no good, very bad person in whatever version of that, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not enough, or I'm not this, unless I have this accolade, unless I have this title, unless I'm doing something towards this identity. We do have that compulsive, we have that obsessive behavior, and that is dangerous. And so if someone's got a broken bone in their femur, they need it to heal up so they can get back to whatever their sport of choice is. We can't just be like, well, you got to rest. We got to be like, okay. So when you're not an athlete, when you've had the best game of your life and it's off season, what do you do to like enjoy your day? What do you do when you're not doing this? What other aspects of your personality or identity can we flex and like kind of stretch into a little bit? And if we have access to that, it makes it a lot easier to kind of starve off that obsessiveness because we have an outlet for that somewhere else that doesn't put them in harm's way. That's a little bit safer.
So great explanation. I think I had two different thoughts come up. First, I've broken 9 bones throughout my athletic career, and
Oh
the
my
thing that
gosh.
helped me not make it worse was that
Yeah.
when I would try and walk or use my arm, whatever the bone was at the time, it was painful, right? So like I was getting regular reminders with this broken bone that like, oh, you can't do that yet. That hurts, that hurts, that hurts, right? So there's this reluctant acceptance of like, fine, I'll just deal with it until it stops hurting.
Yeah.
I've also pushed myself too far and kind of disconnected from myself, went into burnout, and it took me probably a year
Mm.
to reassimilate with a newer, evolved identity and take in some of the lessons. And it is something I'm much more humbly respectful of because that was a bitch compared to the nine other bones, which were much easier because I kept getting the pain notification of like, oh, right, that's still there. Right. So
Yeah.
I didn't have the notification, it was still there. I had the absence of myself, and it was
Yeah.
different. Um, and when the other thing that popped up when you were talking about is because like joy and vulnerability, right? So you're talking about like the importance of having fun, being playful, enjoying your life, not just making it all work, which I totally agree with. And I also happen to be like a Brene Brown nut, and she'll tell you that joy is the most vulnerable emotion,
Yeah.
which is surprising for most people because we think of joy with such wonder and fun, and who doesn't like having joy? But it also means it's the furthest that you can fall is from joy. So
Yeah.
we're talking about, our ability to recognize kind of this revolutionary understanding of how we need to relate to ourselves with our body, how we move it, how we nourish it, how we rest it with our sleep, and how we relate to it with its hypnosis, mindset, nervous system, right?
Yep.
There's a vulnerability to re-identify yourself. And yet at the same time, they don't have the perpetual pain saying, hey, this hurts if you keep doing this. Hey, like they can take a break for a month or two, and then the nervous system, they might not have as much of that connection, but it's different. It's not painful, it's absence. So how do you navigate that? The
Yeah.
vulnerability with the lack of pain, I suppose.
Yeah, that feedback loop, right? When you have a broken
Yeah.
bone, you're like, cool, feedback. Oh, not done yet.
Wow.
Okay, take
Yeah.
it easy. Okay, great. Yeah, focus on something else, right? With burnout, you're like, okay, can I go back? Can I not? And you can feel ready. In fact, I know myself, I'm like, oh no, my back pain is like in remission. Dog's being cool today. Okay, we're good. And then we're not good.
Right.
Hunter S. Thompson's got that fun quote that the person who knows where the line is the one that's crossed it like too many times, right? They're like, that's exact. I know where it is to the millimeter. It's not like, right? And the hard
Yeah.
part with burnout is if you've burned out once, you're more likely
Mhm.
statistically than the other average population to burn out again. And if you burned out twice, you're more likely to burn out like multiple times.
Mhm.
And I think some of that comes down to not being aware of what's pushing us there, of those like things that are back in the background that are just outside of our contextual awareness. And so it may not even be the volume of work. It may not be like the passion that you have for the work. It may not even be the relationship you have with the boss. It could be some of those other subconscious things that are going on where it becomes obsessive, where it becomes in this. It's this behavioral pattern and it's stemming from that identity piece. In the Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about that at difference in identity, where he
Mhm.
talks about like saying, I'm a non smoker versus no thanks.
Right.
I don't want a cigarette. And so when we're talking about a person who's gone through burnout once or twice or three times, there's enough feedback in their lifetime that they know that something needs to change. They absolutely may not be aware of what it is, which is why they're probably in my, I have a selection bias.
We're
That's why
here
they're
for
reaching out for help in the first place. So luckily, they're highly motivated. They're very excited to learn about these other things that they don't have contextual things for. And so you can actually use that motivation to kind of go through there. But there is a vulnerability in like letting go of what has worked for you
you.
if you don't have other tools to hold on to while you're making that transition. And so being able to provide them with other things to do in the meantime, other tools, other techniques. And some of that somatic regulation stuff is really helpful. Some of that self hypnosis stuff is really helpful. Looking at the little low lying fruit that, like, what was the best thing you did yesterday that, like, made your life easier? Can we do more of that today? Do we do it 2 or 3 times? Oh, we only did it twice. Okay, could we do 3 times tomorrow? Maybe let's see. And you can use that kind of competitive driven, someone would say obstinate mindset to like leverage and pointing them in the direction of their well-being instead of outward measures of success, because I don't believe that like success is built upon sacrifice. I actually believe it's built through like your well-being. I don't think it's built at the expense of your well-being. And so the more we kind of center well-being as the primary focus for these individuals, the more successful they're going to be in the long run. And they're going to have highs that are higher than they ever had before when they were limping through life. They're going to be
Mm.
like way less resistance, way less effort, and all of those little things that are in the periphery that slow them down won't be there. Um, but it does take time, it is frustrating to have to go through that. I have so much sympathy and empathy and compassion for
Yeah.
third timer burning out, and you're like, what is happening? What is going on?
So
Yeah,
do you start them there then? Like if you have someone who comes to you and they're like, I've burnt out 3, 4 times. I need to eat better. I know I need to move better. I know I need to sleep better. Do
sure.
you start with all of that, or do you start with the like, well, if you keep burning yourself out, you're clearly not aware of something. So that's where we do need to start.
So it depends on where they are in that burnout cycle. If they're in like the first couple stages of it, where they're like, oh yeah, I just like my sleep isn't great, and like I'm getting like a little irritated with people. Okay, cool. Like we can do the hard things. We can dive deep and find like the biggest lift. Like what's the lowest thing that's not working? Can we add a little bit of it? And then what's the best thing? Let's do more of it. If they're kind of in those middle stages where it's been going on for 3 or 4 months now, and they're starting to get a little fried, and like their ability to like think abstract is like diminished, and they've noticed their cognitive, they're like, I'm just not myself anymore, I'm not sharp like I used to be. And like on the weekends I just have to just doom scroll the entire weekend because I have nothing left to like create a problem solve. We don't get to add more to their life. That's going to overwhelm their already overloaded system. So we have to be like, okay, what are the 5 things that you've been doing that are like habits that are easy and effortless for you to do that add to your well-being, that aren't effortful? Okay, can we just focus on doing a little bit more of those? And then we can also look at like what's the biggest offender, and is there something that we can do that like remove that as much as absolutely possible. Sometimes it's really challenging because it can be a relationship with their boss, and we're not going to do a bunch of attachment work if they're in that state, right? But if someone's completely in burnout, like they're full cynicism, they're like rolling their eyes at everything and like, how dare they? And they're like almost coming to me as a challenge to prove to themselves that it's actually, out of their control. We're not going to even do most of those things. We're just going to be able to put them in a relaxed state as much as absolutely possible so they can get out of that like downward tailspin and kind of stabilize a little bit.
Hmm.
I have one more question before we go. Um, Being that you work with leaders, I know that you also do some work with imposter syndrome, and I'm curious
Yeah.
what you can tell us about that.
Yeah. I think imposter syndrome is 2 things. One, it's a sign that like you do not have the dark triad and you're in a position of leadership, which is great. That is a great thing. I would love for more people to be in leadership positions that didn't have that dark triad trait going on. And if you have an imposter syndrome, you are likely to be like, am I enough? Am I doing the right work? How do I deserve here? I feel like I could be doing more, or I could be helping people better, or there's something else that could be going on. Those are all healthy concepts when they're not taken to a full extreme. But when we're really stressed out, and we've been that way for a long time, we have this opportunity to look back in our distressed state and take these neutral things and make them really bad, and take the not so great things that we could be better at and making them horrific, and then beating ourselves up for it and getting stuck in that kind of rumination and being really judgmental about ourselves and our position that we're in there. And some of that stuff comes from a place where that feels familiar because we grew up like that at a really young age. And so it's familiar territory. We're like, oh, of course, here it is again. I always feel like this. And so it's easier for us to carry on that like schema, that worldview. And so some of that is self compassion. It's saying, like, hey, even though I did XYZ, I also did QDTR or whatever it may be, good or bad, and giving yourself credit for that. Once again, if you're full burnout and you're in cynicism mode, that self-compassion just kind of like rolls off of you. You're just like, what? This feels too foo-foo-y for me. I can't wear this well. So once again, we have to get into that regulated state to be able to even begin some of that self-compassion to actually land and bump up against some of our identity pieces inside of ourselves. But even then, that idea of going, okay, what else do I need to do? Because if I'm doing this thinking in this disorganized state, this overwhelmed state, everything I think about is going to feel that way. It's like Midas with the golden touch. He touches, a rose petal. Cool. He's got this awesome rose petal that's gold now. And then he touches his daughter, and now he has a statue for a daughter. Like, we want to be careful about what the things we're touching when we're in that state. And we want to be able to get out of that state. So if we notice that we're overthinking, I don't know if people can actually overthink, there's so much to know, but we can do unproductive thinking because if we're in that state, we're almost Midas. We have to be really careful. That story follows our state. So whatever we touch is going to get soured by that. So if we're touching ourself and about our beliefs and our ability to perform, we could be making it worse when we're in that state. So we got to get out of that state first. And then we can worry about like some of that self-compassion piece.
Hmm.
I love that. It
Yeah,
sounds like it all goes back to the nervous system regulation.
I,
I
in
mean,
my opinion, but obviously I'm biased. So
no, I mean, I think like at the heart of it, what you're doing matters profoundly for anyone and everyone because like, you know, one of the things like I think COVID taught a lot of people is how valuable health is.
yeah,
Um, like I literally remember saying to my husband at one point, I didn't know I was training for this, but apparently I was training for this.
yeah,
And I was really grateful that, my parents instilled health as a value for me because our brain craves pleasure, it wants to avoid pain, and wants to conserve energy. And being healthy doesn't necessarily fit into those. And it's really about an intentionality. This is such a complex conversation because humans are complex. No nervous system is the same. Everyone has their own degree of trauma. There's a aspect of being a high performer and overachiever that is literally directly associated with that. So it
yeah,
really is this uh, reluctant, humble acceptance of what it really means to be human and how our nervous system plays into that, and whether we want to plow through and have the biggest impact or have the title, whatever our desire is, our nervous system doesn't care. It doesn't care what our psychological preferences are. It cares about its own ability to be human. And I think kind of coming back to that grounded state of what does it even mean to be human is a great place to land when you don't know where to go.
yeah. You're definitely not an automaton. You're definitely not a machine. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm. And even machines dream and sleep. Like even
What did
machines
you
have
say?
troubles with like competing um, programming, where if they're running both programs and they come in conflict with each other, they like reboot one and then dump it and then reboot the other one, dump it and just burn through their battery with getting nothing done. So like if machines dream and machines have problems with cognitive dissonance, it's probably because we do and we designed them with our own flaws in there. So we got to own it ourselves.
Mm.
So if you had to leave the listeners with one thing, Garrett, what would it be?
Yeah. If we choose to believe the myth that success requires sacrifice, what does your next week look like? Okay. And if instead we choose to try to believe something different, that success is actually built through your well being, not at its expense, what does next week look like? What does next month look like? What does 30 years from now look like?
That was awesome. Now I want to take a nap. I feel like that every Monday though. So
That's fair.
Naps are great. I love it.
thank you very much for being with us today and for sharing your expertise because it was a lot. I felt like I was just downloading a lot of information while you were sharing today. So, um, but I love that you're starting with doable actions for people and trying to take into consideration what feels doable to the individual rather than whatever agenda might be beneficial to push. And I think we don't have a whole lot of that in Western medicine. And I have no problem with Western medicine. I say that all the time, but we don't look at what works for the individual very well. And we don't take that into consideration. And I think that's such a huge component to well-being.
Yeah.
Uh, and I appreciate that you guys are doing your due diligence to figure out what is going to be best for the individual rather than giving blanket assignments or programs or answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I do think in the 50s, we were like rounding down to like standardization. We're like, cool, if we get every nut and bolt in the world to be a standard fit, it simplifies all these processes. And I think that's probably true for mechanized processes. I don't think that that's true for nervous systems. I think when we design for the mean and we try to accommodate everybody there, we really paralyze and disable people on the outsides of those things. And if instead we chose to like be inclusive in our design process and we designed for the extremes, everybody in the mean would still be accommodated, but so would the people out here. And so trying to figure out where are you in that bell curve of your nervous system, what it needs, and figuring out how to accommodate yourself, I think is a pretty radical act and a super important one to be able to do for yourself because no one's going to do it for you because we're just not there. We're
Yeah.
still coming off of that 1950s regression to the mean kind of perspective.
Do you have
Well
a
said.
closing thought, Laura?
No, I mean, I think that there's a lot of nuggets in this entire episode about how we want to live. Like it's very easy to think about what we want based on what we think it will give us, and half the time we're wrong. But how do we want to live? I don't think that's something people really consider. And like your analogy about your dog being annoying, I have a rule with my dogs that if I ever feel too rushed that I can't get on the ground and like love them for a minute, then I'm moving too fast in my life. And like that's like a boundary that I have to like make sure I don't go too far one way or the other. But it's an imperfect practice. It's more about having the resilience to keep going and having the compassion to realize that you're human. You're supposed to walk over the line to learn where the line is sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, so
So,
beautiful, guys. All
team.
right. Well, thank you once again and tune in next time.
Yeah.